If you carry me up the stairs, I'll tell you a secret." The voice was a tiny, fragile thread in the cavernous silence of the foyer, a sound so small it barely registered against the oppressive quiet of the monolithic estate. Marcus Thorne froze, his hand hovering over the cold brass of the front doorknob. He had just returned from a brutal week in Hong Kong, closing a deal that would solidify his empire for the next decade, and all he wanted was the sterile solitude of his study and a glass of scotch that was older than the woman who had just been hired to care for his daughter. He turned slowly. Sitting at the bottom of the grand, sweeping staircase was 7-year-old Lily, her small frame swallowed by an oversized armchair someone had inexplicably moved into the hall. Her legs, thin and frail, didn't quite reach the floor. Beside her, holding a glass of water, was the new caregiver, a young black woman named Ava Williams. He'd only glanced at her file. Competent, experienced, background check clean. He hadn't bothered to learn more. They never lasted. He leveled a cool, dismissive gaze at Ava. "She should be in her room. It's past her bedtime." "She was waiting for you, sir," Ava said, her voice quiet but steady. She had a calmness about her that he found both irritating and unsettling. "She said she had something important to tell you." Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't have time for this, for the cloying, emotional demands of a child he barely knew how to speak to anymore. His daughter was a fragile porcelain doll, a constant, living reminder of the wife he had lost, and the life that had been stolen from them both. Lily's illness, a rare and aggressive form of juvenile arthritis, had transformed her from a bright, laughing child into a quiet, pain-ridden shadow. "I'm tired, Lily," he said, his voice flatter than he intended. "We can talk in the morning." "But it's a good secret," Lily insisted, her large, dark eyes, so much like her mother's, fixed on him. "It's about Mommy." A shard of ice seemed to pierce Marcus's chest. He hated when she mentioned her mother. It was a wound he couldn't bear to touch. He looked at Ava again, an irrational anger rising in him. "Have you been putting these ideas in her head?" "No, sir," Ava said, her expression unreadable. "Lily thinks about her mother all the time. I just listen." "Fine," Marcus snapped, his patience gone. He strode over, intending to scoop his daughter up in a quick, efficient movement. But as he reached for her, Lily flinched, a small, almost imperceptible tensing of her body. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean into his touch either. Instead, she looked past him, her gaze finding Ava's. The silent, profound connection between them was a physical presence in the room, a bond he was not a part of. And it was in that moment, seeing his own daughter seek comfort from a stranger while recoiling from him, that something inside Marcus Thorne, something he had kept locked away behind a fortress of grief and power, finally broke. His anger, misdirected and savage, found its target. He whirled on Ava. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You've been here less than a month. You are her caregiver, not her confidant. You are an employee. You are not her mother." The words were designed to be weapons, to put her back in her place, to reassert the cold, hard lines of their arrangement. He saw her flinch, a subtle tightening of her shoulders, but her eyes, when they met his, held no fear. They held a quiet, devastating sorrow. And something else. Pity. And that was the most infuriating thing of all. "Your daughter needs her father, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through his rage with the clean edge of truth. "And you are the only one she has." Before he could retort, before he could fire her, before he could unleash the torrent of pain and fury that was choking him, Lily spoke again, her voice a little stronger now. "Please, Daddy." My legs hurt tonight." The simple, honest plea of a child in pain shattered the last of his anger, leaving a cold, hollow void in its place. He looked from his daughter's pleading face to Ava's steady, challenging gaze, and felt like a stranger in his own home, a king who had lost his kingdom and didn't even know how. Wordlessly, he bent down and gently, carefully, lifted his daughter into his arms. She was so light, a bundle of fragile bones and quiet breaths. As he began the slow ascent up the grand staircase, Lily rested her head on his shoulder and whispered into his ear. Her secret, a warm, heartbreaking breath against his cold skin. "Mommy told me an angel would come to help us," she murmured. "I think it's her." Marcus's step faltered. He looked down the staircase to where Ava stood, watching them, her expression a complex mixture of compassion and profound sadness. He had just tried to wound a woman who, in his daughter's eyes, was a divine messenger. And in the silent, echoing space of the great mansion, Marcus Thorne was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that his little girl might be right. The hours that followed Lily's whispered confession were a long, silent reckoning for Marcus Thorne. After he had tucked his daughter into bed, administered her nightly dose of medication, and watched her drift into a sleep that was blessedly peaceful for the first time in weeks, he retreated to his study. The room, his sanctuary, a space of dark wood, worn leather, and the quiet, orderly hum of global markets scrolling across a bank of monitors offered no comfort. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the familiar burn of the expensive liquor a welcome, grounding sensation, but it did nothing to quiet the storm in his mind. "Mommy told me an angel would come to help us. I think it's her." The words echoed, a child's innocent pronouncement that held the weight of a damning judgment. He had looked at Ava Williams and seen an employee, a functionary, a temporary solution to a logistical problem. His daughter had looked at the same woman and seen an angel. The chasm between their perceptions was vast and terrifying. He sat in his large, imposing leather chair, the one he had sat in when he'd closed the biggest deals of his career, and felt impossibly small. He replayed the scene in the foyer over and over. The way Lily had flinched from his touch. The way her eyes had sought out Ava's for reassurance. The quiet, unshakable dignity in Ava's face as he had hurled those cruel, impotent words at her. "You are not her mother." He had meant it to be a boundary, a wall. But it had been a mirror, reflecting his own profound, cavernous failure. He was the one who was not a parent, not really. He was a provider, a protector of assets, a manager of schedules and specialists. But a father? He hadn't been a father since the day his wife Isabella had died. He had outsourced that role, along with everything else that required a heart, to a rotating cast of strangers. He got up and walked to the built-in bookshelf, his fingers tracing the spines of the leather-bound classics he had never read. Tucked away on a lower shelf, almost hidden, was a small, silver-framed photograph. It was of Isabella and Lily, taken on Lily's 5th birthday. Just 6 months before the diagnosis that had stolen everything, they were in the garden, their heads bent together over a ladybug that had landed on a rose petal. Both of them laughing, their faces illuminated by a joy so pure and radiant, it was almost painful to look at now. He picked up the frame, his thumb stroking the cool glass over his wife's face. She had been the light, the warmth, the gravitational center of their universe. Without her, the house was just a collection of beautiful empty rooms, and he and Lily were just 2 satellites spun out of orbit, drifting in the cold, silent dark. It was Mrs. Gable, the estate's longtime housekeeper, a woman with a perpetually worried expression and a heart of gold, who found him there an hour later. She had come in to turn down the lights for the night and stopped in the doorway, her hand hesitating on the light switch. "Sir?" she said softly. He didn't look up from the photograph. "She was waiting for you all day," Mrs. Gable said, her voice filled with a gentle, maternal reproach. Miss Ava read her 3 chapters of her favorite book and played 2 games of checkers just to keep her spirits up. She kept saying, "Daddy's coming home today." Marcus's throat tightened. He had known, of course, that it was the day he was due back, but in the whirlwind of his trans-Pacific flight and the post-deal adrenaline, the thought of his daughter's small, hopeful vigil had barely registered. "The new caregiver," he said, his voice a rough, unused sound. "Ava, what's her story?" Mrs. Gable stepped further into the room. "She's a quiet one, sir. Keeps to herself. But she has a way with the child. A patience I haven't seen in any of the others." Siti, the housekeeper, paused, then added, "She lost her own mother not long ago. Cancer. She was her sole caregiver for the last 2 years. Dropped out of a prestigious music program to do it." Each word was another small, sharp piece of the puzzle of Ava Williams, a puzzle he had never shown the slightest interest in solving. She wasn't just a nanny. She was a woman who understood, on a cellular level, the landscape of loss and the profound weight of caregiving. She wasn't an interloper in his grief. She was a fellow traveler. He finally looked up at Mrs. Gable, his own eyes reflecting a deep, weary sorrow. "I said some things to her tonight, Gable. Things I shouldn't have." The housekeeper's expression softened with a pity that was almost worse than her judgment. "Fear makes us cruel, sir, especially fear for a child." "I need to fix it," he said, the words a quiet, desperate admission. Mrs. Gable simply nodded. "I believe her room is at the end of the East Wing corridor. And, sir, she hasn't taken a single bite of the dinner I left for her." The information landed with the weight of another failure. He had not only insulted her, he had made her feel so unwelcome in his home that she couldn't even eat. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. He stood up, placed the photograph carefully back on the shelf, and walked out of the study, his footsteps echoing in the vast, silent house. He was moving not with the confident stride of the master of the estate, but with the hesitant, uncertain steps of a man who was beginning to understand that he knew nothing at all. He had built an empire on seeing what others missed, on anticipating market shifts and human weaknesses. But in his own home, in his own heart, he had been profoundly, devastatingly blind. Lily's regression began subtly, a quiet, inward turning that was almost more alarming than a loud tantrum. The following morning, she refused to get out of bed, her small body curled into a tight, protective ball under the heavy duvet. She claimed her joints ached more than usual, a familiar complaint, but this time it was accompanied by a listlessness, a profound lack of her usual quiet spark. She didn't ask for her favorite breakfast, didn't want to listen to music. She just lay there, her large, expressive eyes, which had begun to regain some of their light in recent weeks, now dull and distant. Dr. Peterson, her pediatric rheumatologist, was called. After a gentle but thorough examination, he delivered his verdict to Marcus in the hallway, his voice a low, concerned murmur. "Physically, her inflammation markers are stable. This isn't a medical flare-up, Marcus. This is psychological. A response to stress. Has something changed in her environment?" Marcus, leaning against the cold, unyielding wall of the corridor, felt a fresh wave of self-loathing wash over him. "I have," he thought. "I am the change. I am the stress." He mumbled something non-committal about a disruption in her routine, the lie feeling thin and pathetic even to his own ears. Dr. Peterson's skeptical gaze told him he wasn't fooling anyone. Well, whatever it is, you need to rectify it. A child in her condition needs absolute emotional stability. Her physical well-being is directly tied to it. After the doctor left, Marcus stood outside Lily's room, paralyzed by a profound sense of inadequacy. He was a fixer, a problem solver. But this was a problem of the heart, and he had no tools, no strategy, no idea how to even begin. He finally pushed the door open. Lily was still in bed, staring at the ceiling. A breakfast tray, untouched, sat on her bedside table. "Lilybug," he said, using a nickname he hadn't used since Isabella was alive. She didn't respond. He sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. "I'm sorry about last night," he said, his voice thick with a regret that was almost choking him. "Daddy was tired, and I was wrong to be so angry." Still, there was no response. She just lay there, a small, silent island in an ocean of grief. And then her small hand emerged from under the covers, and she pointed a single, trembling finger toward the door. It was a gesture of dismissal, an echo of his own words to Ava. And it was devastating. He had not just fired her caregiver, he had, in a single, brutal moment, made his own daughter feel so unsafe that she was now pushing him away, too. He retreated to his study, the silence of the house now a suffocating presence. He found the agency's number and dialed, his heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm. The administrator who answered was the same coolly professional woman he had spoken to before. "I need to contact Ava Williams," he said, his own voice tight, stripped of its usual authority. "I need to offer her job back." There was a polite, clinical pause on the other end of the line. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Thorne. Miss Williams has already informed us that she will not be returning. She cited a hostile work environment." The words were a clean, sterile, and utterly final judgment. Did she give a forwarding address?" Marcus asked, his last desperate hope dwindling. "I'm sorry, sir. That's confidential." He hung up the phone, the dial tone a flat, indifferent buzz in his ear. She was gone. He had not just broken a fragile trust, he had severed the one lifeline his daughter had managed to find in the 18 months since her world had fallen apart. He spent the rest of the day in a haze of quiet desperation, trying to coax Lily to eat, to talk, to do anything other than stare blankly at the ceiling. But she had retreated to a place he couldn't reach. It was late in the afternoon when Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, knocked softly on his study door. "Sir," she said, her voice hesitant, "I may know something." He looked up, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. Miss Ava, she used to volunteer at a small community music center in the city on her days off. The Harmony Project, I think it's called. She said it was for children who couldn't afford lessons. The information was a lifeline. He found the address online, a small, non-profit organization located in a less than fashionable part of the city. He didn't call, he just got in his car and drove. The Bentley, a sleek black symbol of his untouchable status, felt absurdly out of place on the narrow, graffiti-lined street. The Harmony Project was housed in a converted warehouse, its brick facade painted with a vibrant, joyful mural of children playing musical instruments. He could hear the faint, chaotic sound of a children's choir practicing as he pushed open the heavy front door. And there she was. She was sitting on a low stool in the center of a room filled with about a dozen young children, a guitar resting on her lap. She was teaching them a simple chord progression, her voice soft and patient, her face illuminated by a joy so pure and unadulterated it took his breath away. She hadn't seen him. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her. A man on the outside of a world he had never known existed. A world of simple, unpretentious beauty. He was a ghost, a trespasser, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Thorne felt truly, profoundly poor. Ava's return to the Thorne estate was not a quiet, deferential re-entry. It was a fundamental recalibration of the entire household's emotional and logistical landscape. She arrived the next morning, not with a small, worn duffel bag, but with two large, heavy cases filled with what appeared to be a mix of therapeutic equipment and musical instruments, sensory mats, weighted blankets, a small, child-sized keyboard, and a collection of colorful, oddly shaped percussion instruments. She walked in, not with a housekeeper's deference or a nurse's quiet compliance, but with the unshakable authority of a specialist taking command of a critical, time-sensitive situation. Her first meeting was not with Marcus, but with Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, in the cavernous, gleaming expanse of the kitchen. She laid out her terms, her voice calm and clear, but with an underlying steel that left no room for negotiation or misinterpretation. Lily's daily schedule, which had been a loose, grief-stricken approximation of normalcy, would now be paramount. It would be rigorously structured around 90-minute blocks of what she called somatic and music-based play in the morning, sensory integration exercises after her nap, and consistent, gentle exposure to new tactile and auditory stimuli. The oppressive silence that had become the home's default state was to be replaced, she declared, with the soft, ambient strains of cello and piano music, Bach and Debussy specifically, which she explained, in a tone that brooked no argument, helped to soothe an overstimulated nervous system and promote a sense of calm and safety. Mrs. Gable, who had witnessed Lily's heartbreaking decline firsthand, received these directives not with resentment, but with a subtle, deeply approving nod. She had seen the state of the child. She recognized a lifeline when she saw one. The first session with Marcus was a masterclass in excruciating, profound awkwardness. He arrived in Lily's room at precisely 10:00 a.m., as instructed, dressed in his usual bespoke suit of charcoal gray, looking as out of place as an orchid in a desert. He sat stiffly on the edge of the plush, cream-colored carpet. A man accustomed to commanding boardrooms from a throne of Italian leather now perched uncomfortably on the floor of his daughter's playroom. He watched, silent and tense, as Ava guided Lily through a series of simple, rhythmic breathing exercises, her focus entirely on the child. Her autoimmune response is exacerbated by stress, which creates a feedback loop of pain and anxiety, Ava explained, her tone clinical but not cold, her hands gently resting on Lily's small shoulders. We have to re-regulate her nervous system before we can even begin to address the physical symptoms. She needs to feel safe in her own body again. Oh, Marcus just nodded, his hands clasped so tightly between his knees that his knuckles were white. A titan of industry reduced to a silent, uncertain, and utterly useless observer. He watched the way she moved, her touch firm but infinitely gentle. Her voice a constant, soothing murmur that seemed to weave a protective, invisible barrier around the girl. He saw the way Lily's tense little body, which had been as rigid as a board in his own arms, would slowly, almost imperceptibly, relax and yield to her touch. For the first 2 days, that was the full extent of his mandated involvement, watching from the periphery, a ghost at the edge of his own daughter's healing. He felt a profound sense of uselessness, a feeling so foreign and unwelcome it was almost physically painful. The breakthrough, if one could call something so small and fragile a breakthrough, came on the 3rd day. The air in the playroom was thick with the scent of rain from a passing afternoon shower. Ava had brought out the small keyboard. She wasn't teaching Lily how to play. She was simply encouraging her to touch the keys, to explore the sounds. Lily was hesitant, her fingers barely brushing the smooth, cool ivory. After a moment of intense, trembling effort, she pressed down on a single key, a clear, bright C note that hung in the quiet room like a bell. A small, surprised gasp escaped her lips. Then she did it again, and again. A simple, one-note song of discovery. Julian watched, holding his breath. He saw a flicker of the old, curious, joyful Lily he thought he had lost forever. He felt a complex, painful knot of grief, frustration, and inadequacy begin to loosen in his chest. He was witnessing a language beyond words, a conversation built on a foundation of patience and radical acceptance. He was learning. Weeks turned into a month, the days marked by the slow, steady rhythm of this fragile, sacred routine. Marcus began to anticipate the daily sessions, not with dread, but with a quiet, intense curiosity. He found himself rearranging international conference calls and pushing back deadlines to ensure he was there, on the floor, at 10 a.m. sharp. He learned the names of Lily's favorite songs, simple, gentle melodies that Ava would play on the guitar. He learned that Lily was soothed by the scent of lavender and the texture of velvet. He learned that her favorite color was the specific shade of blue in the sky just after a rainstorm. One gray afternoon, Ava was helping Lily stand, her small body supported between two low, padded chairs. Lily was wobbly, her legs trembling with the effort. She started to lose her balance. Marcus, who was sitting nearby, ostensibly reading a financial report, but in reality watching their every move, lunged forward without a single conscious thought. His hand shot out to steady Lily's back at the exact same instant as Ava's. Their hands brushed, his large calloused from years of gripping golf clubs and shaking hands on multi-million-dollar deals. Hers smaller, softer, but with a surprising, sinewy strength. It was a small, fleeting touch, but the jolt of it, the shared, instinctive parental act of protection, was electric. A current of warmth, of an unspoken, profound connection, lingered in the air between them long after they both pulled their hands away, as if burned. Ava felt a hot flush creep up her neck, and she immediately, professionally, turned her attention back to Lily, her voice a little breathless. "Good save, Lilybug. You're getting so strong." T. Marcus cleared his throat and stepped back, the intensity of the moment broken but not forgotten. He looked at their two hands, then back at his daughter, who was now standing, safely supported between them. They were no longer just an employer and his specialist, locked in a contractual arrangement. They were two people, tethered by love and loss to the same small, fragile center of gravity. A girl who was finally, painstakingly, learning to stand on her own again. The fragile, carefully constructed piece of the Thorne estate, a delicate ecosystem of therapy sessions, shared glances, and quiet, incremental progress, was shattered by the unexpected, unannounced arrival of Catherine Davenport, Marcus's late wife's older sister. She did not call ahead. She did not wait to be announced by Mrs. Gable. She swept into the lobby of the building like a winter storm front, dressed in an impeccably tailored navy blue suit that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. Her blonde hair was styled in a severe, formidable bob, and her eyes, a pale, icy blue, were as sharp and cold as the diamonds glittering at her ears. Catherine was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, a woman who did not ask for permission. She simply took possession of any room she entered, and the Thorne estate, the home of her only niece, was, in her mind, fundamentally her territory. She found them in the sunroom, which had become Lily's primary therapy space. It was a scene of quiet, focused, domestic industry. Marcus, His suit jacket discarded and sleeves rolled to his elbows was on the floor, helping Lily fit large, chunky pieces into a wooden puzzle. Ava knelt beside them, coaching the girl softly, her finger gently guiding Lily's small hand toward the correct shape. Catherine stopped dead in the doorway, her manicured hand flying to her throat in a gesture of pure, theatrical horror. Her gaze swept over the scene, her expression a mask of undisguised revulsion. The carefully maintained facade of high society composure cracked, revealing the raw, possessive grief that churned beneath. "Marcus, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice dripping with an icy disdain that made the warm, sunlit air feel suddenly frigid. Her eyes flickered to Ava, appraising and dismissing her in a single, brutal glance, as one might an intrusive, poorly chosen piece of furniture that had inexplicably appeared in a priceless showroom. "Auntie Kate," Lily chirped, her small face lighting up with the innocent, uncomplicated delight of a child seeing a familiar face. Catherine's severe expression softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her niece, a flicker of genuine, fierce love in her cold eyes. But the warmth vanished the instant her gaze returned to Ava, her expression hardening once more into a mask of contempt. "I was under the impression," she said, her words aimed squarely at Marcus like poisoned darts, "that you had hired a qualified team of professionals, psychologists, physical therapists, to oversee Lily's care." Her tone made it unequivocally clear that the woman on the floor with her niece was not included in that esteemed category. "This is Ava Williams, Catherine," Marcus said, rising slowly to his feet, his own posture stiffening in response to her attack. "She is Lily's primary caregiver and developmental specialist." Catherine arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, the gesture a masterclass in condescension. "Specialist? The placement agency I contacted for a reference informed me you had hired a temporary caregiver, a young woman of color with an incomplete education." The dismissive description hung in the air, ugly and sharp and dissonant in the cheerful sunroom. Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing rhythmically in his cheek. Her qualifications are impeccable, her results are undeniable, and her race is entirely irrelevant. "Is it?" Catherine countered, stepping fully into the room, her presence, her expensive perfume, her aura of monolithic self-assurance dominating the space. "I find it highly irregular that this woman has been given such an intimate and influential role in my niece's life. A child in her delicate condition, Marcus, needs stability. She needs familiarity. She needs family." The implication was a stiletto, sharp, thin, and aimed directly at Ava's heart. Ava was not family. She was an outsider, an interloper, a temporary fixture who had overstepped her bounds. Ava, who had remained silent and still throughout this exchange, her hand resting protectively on Lily's small back, now straightened her spine. She did not rise to her feet. That would be a concession of her place on the floor with Lily, a retreat from her rightful position beside her. She simply looked up, her gaze direct and unclouded by fear. "With all due respect, Mrs. Davenport," she said, her voice quiet but imbued with an unshakable firmness that seemed to surprise even Marcus. "Lily's condition has improved so dramatically precisely because she has had stability. I have been with her every day, for every small struggle and every tiny victory. That is the very definition of familiarity." "And you believe that gives you some sort of claim on her?" Catherine scoffed, her lip curling in a faint, ugly sneer. "I believe it gives me a deep and accurate understanding of what this child needs," Ava replied, her voice remaining level, her gaze unflinching. "And right now, she needs patience and trust. She does not need a disruption caused by prejudice and a misplaced sense of ownership." A tense, profound silence ensued. the air in the room crackling with the electricity of unspoken histories and raw, colliding griefs. Marcus, caught between the formidable iron will of his late wife's sister and his new, fragile but fiercely protective trust in Ava, finally found his voice, and the man who spoke was not the hesitant, grieving father of weeks past, but the decisive leader he was in the boardroom. "Catherine," he said, his tone quiet, but leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. "Ava has my full and complete confidence. She stays." Catherine's eyes narrowed into slits of cold blue fury. "Then you leave me no choice," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I will not stand by and watch my sister's daughter be raised by an unqualified, opportunistic stranger. I am speaking to my lawyers this afternoon. I will file for temporary guardianship, citing an unsafe and unstable home environment. We will see what a family court judge has to say about this arrangement." With that final, devastating pronouncement, she turned on her heel and swept out of the room, leaving a vortex of chilling silence in her wake. The threat hung in the air, heavy and real and immediate. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his face pale and drawn. "She's not bluffing," he said quietly, his voice hollow with the certainty of the coming storm. "She will do it." Ava looked down at Lily, who, sensing the seismic shift in the room's emotional landscape, had crawled fully into her lap, her small face buried in the soft fabric of her shirt, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. The world had just shrunk again, the protective walls of the estate closing in. The fight for Lily's future wasn't just about healing her past anymore. It was about to become a war for her present, and Ava knew, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that she was standing at the very center of the battlefield. Catherine Davenport's threat of a protracted, ugly custody battle threw Marcus and Ava into a forced, intense, and profoundly intimate alliance. The estate, which had just begun to feel like a space of quiet, therapeutic healing, transformed overnight into a strategic command center for a war they hadn't chosen but were now compelled to fight. Lawyers, their faces grim and their voices a low, constant murmur of legal precedents and strategic options, came and went. The grand, echoing dining room table, once reserved for silent, solitary meals, was now permanently littered with stacks of legal documents, depositions from former staff, and child psychology textbooks that were underlined and flagged with dozens of colored sticky notes. In this new, high-stakes arena, Marcus was a different man. The cold, decisive CEO, the one who had been softened and humbled in the quiet of the sunroom, re-emerged, but his focus this time was not on profit margins or market share. It was on the singular, ruthless, and all-consuming goal of protecting his daughter from being torn apart. He and Ava worked late into the night, every night, a strange, sleep-deprived team fueled by endless pots of black coffee and a shared, desperate purpose. He handled the intricate legal strategy, his mind sharp and analytical as he dissected precedents from similar cases and drafted blistering affidavits. She, in turn, became the chief architect of their defense's core argument, meticulously compiling the overwhelming evidence of Lily's progress. She organized her daily logs into a comprehensive timeline, edited hours of video clips that showed her staggering improvement in mobility and speech, and created detailed charts that tracked her pain levels and medication needs, which had both decreased significantly under her care. It was in one of these late-night sessions, surrounded by the ghosts of his wife's art history books in the vast, silent library, that Marcus's carefully constructed armor of professional detachment finally, completely, cracked. He was staring into an untouched glass of amber whiskey, the crystal catching the low, warm light of the desk lamp, when he spoke, his voice so low that Ava had to lean in to hear him over the soft rustle of her papers. Catherine blames me for what happened to Isabella, he said, the words heavy, as if he were pulling them up from a deep, dark well. She's convinced I didn't do enough to save her. Ava looked up from the report she was annotating, her pen pausing mid-sentence. The air in the room grew still. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. "Isabella's arthritis. It was a rare, aggressive variant. The doctors said it was manageable, not curable. She was a fighter. She was a dancer before we met. She refused to let it define her," he said, a bitter, self-deprecating laugh catching in his throat. "She was so full of life. When she got pregnant with Lily, she was ecstatic, but the pregnancy accelerated the disease. The pain became constant. I threw money at the problem. The best specialists, experimental treatments, private nurses. I thought I could buy her a cure." He swirled the whiskey in his glass, the ice clinking softly. "The end came so fast. An infection. Her immune system was too compromised. It took her in 3 days." His voice finally broke, a raw, ragged sound of a wound that had never been allowed to heal. "Catherine thinks that if I had been a different kind of husband, if I had pushed for more aggressive treatment sooner, if I had found the right doctor, she'd still be here." He finally looked at Ava, his eyes stripped bare, raw with a grief he had never allowed anyone to witness before. "And the hell of it is, maybe she's right." A long, profound silence filled the room, broken only by the soft, distant hum of the city that never slept, far below them. Ava chose her words with the care and precision of a surgeon tending to a vital artery. "You can't carry the weight of a disease, Marcus. It wasn't a choice. It was a tragedy. That weight is not yours to carry." She watched him, saw the flicker of protest, of ingrained guilt in his eyes, and she made a decision. It was time to build a different, more profound kind of bridge between them, one built not on a shared purpose, but on shared pain. "I lost someone too," she said, her voice dropping to a soft, confidential whisper. "My mother. She had cancer. I was in my final year of my music program at Juilliard, a full scholarship. I was arrogant." She took a shaky breath. "I thought I knew better than her doctors. I thought I could manage her care myself, that my love would be enough. I was the expert." Tears she hadn't shed in years, tears she had locked away behind a wall of professional competence, burned hot behind her eyes. I ignored the signs that she was getting worse. I told myself it was just a temporary setback. I was so focused on my own ability to fix her that I didn't see that she was slipping away, until it was too late. She looked down at her hands, which were clenched so tightly in her lap that her nails dug into her palms. "I left Juilliard a week after her funeral. I left because I couldn't bear the sound of the music anymore. It felt like a betrayal. For a very long time, I believed her death was my fault, my punishment for my pride." Marcus stared at her, the vast, unbridgeable gulf between them, of wealth, of race, of life experience, suddenly, completely vanishing. It was replaced by the universal, desolate, and achingly familiar landscape of grief and guilt. In that moment, they were not a billionaire and his daughter's caregiver. They were just two people, haunted by the relentless, whispering ghosts of what-ifs. It was in that moment of shared, devastating vulnerability that their alliance was truly and irrevocably forged. It was no longer a professional arrangement of convenience or necessity. It was a bond, deep and resonant, sealed in the quiet, sacred understanding of shared, unbearable loss. The next morning, driven by this new, unspoken intimacy and a desperate search for anything that might help their case, Ava was looking for a specific file on Lily's early medical history in Isabella's old art studio, a sun-drenched room filled with canvases and the scent of turpentine that Marcus had kept locked, a perfect, untouched shrine, until now. It was on a high, dusty shelf, tucked away behind a stack of art supply catalogs, that she found them, a set of 5 matching leather-bound sketchbooks. They weren't filled with landscapes or still lifes, they were visual diaries. Her heart pounded a nervous rhythm against her ribs as she carefully took one down and opened it. Isabella's elegant, confident drawings filled the pages. She had documented her life, her love for Marcus, her deep and boundless excitement for Lily's arrival, but also, threaded through the hopeful, joyful images, was a subtle, persistent current of deep-seated fear. A fear of her sister's judgment, a fear of her illness stealing her daughter's childhood. One drawing depicted a beautiful, vibrant woman trapped inside a glass box, her hands pressed against the invisible walls. But it was the last sketchbook, the one from the final, harrowing weeks before her death, that held the key. Ava's hands trembled as she found the final, unfinished sketch. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a portrait, rendered in soft, charcoal lines, of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, a woman who looked strikingly like Ava, holding the hand of a small, radiant child. On the bottom of the page, in Isabella's elegant, looping script, were the words, "Find the woman with the music in her hands. She will teach our daughter how to dance again." Ava sank into the artist's stool, the sketchbook clutched tightly in her hands, hot tears blurring the soft charcoal lines. Isabella had known. She had seen her, somehow, in a dream, a premonition, a desperate mother's prayer. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a legacy, an inheritance of trust, passed from one mother to another across the veil of death itself. The mediation was held in a sterile, soulless conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown law office, a place of polished mahogany and hushed, expensive silence designed to bleach all emotion from human conflict. Catherine Davenport sat on one side of the vast table, flanked by 2 sharp-suited lawyers who radiated an aura of predatory competence. She was the very picture of bereaved, righteous indignation. On the other side sat Marcus, with Ava directly beside him. Her presence was not a provocation. It was a silent, powerful declaration of their united, unshakable front. Catherine's lead lawyer, a man with silver hair and a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, began. He painted a masterful, condescending picture of a grieving, overwhelmed single father, a man so consumed by his work that he had recklessly outsourced his most sacred parental duties to an unlicensed, unvetted, and dangerously opportunistic caregiver. He presented glossy, artfully framed photographs of Ava's modest apartment building, highlighted her failure to complete her music degree, and systematically questioned her qualifications with surgical precision. "This woman, Your Honor," he concluded, his voice resonating with a dramatic, practiced gravitas, "is a risk, a dangerous, unknown variable that my client, in her profound love for her only niece, is simply not willing to accept." When it was their turn, Marcus spoke first, but his strategy was a shocking, brilliant departure from the aggressive defense his own lawyers had meticulously prepared. He didn't defend himself. He confessed. "For the first year after my wife's death, I was not the father my daughter, Lily, deserved," he said, his voice clear and steady, resonating with the quiet, irrefutable power of unvarnished truth. "I was lost in my own grief. I was absent, and in many ways, I failed her." He turned his gaze directly to Catherine, not with anger, but with a look of profound, sorrowful acknowledgement. "You were right to be concerned. I was concerned. He paused, allowing the weight of his admission to settle in the silent room, then turned his body slightly, a subtle but significant gesture of inclusion and partnership toward Ava. But then I did the one thing my late wife Isabella asked of me. I found the person she instructed me to find. With a calm, deliberate movement, he slid a document across the polished surface of the table. It was a high-resolution, certified copy of Isabella's final damning sketch. Catherine's lawyer picked it up, his confident, predatory smirk faltering as he read the words. Catherine leaned over, her own eyes scanning the familiar, elegant handwriting of her sister. A small, sharp, involuntary gasp escaped her lips, a tiny, heartbreaking sound of shock and utter disbelief in the quiet room. Isabella chose Ava, Marcus said softly. She knew Lily would need someone with a specific gift, a specific kind of strength. And, as always, she was right. Seats. Then it was Ava's turn to speak. She didn't rise to her feet. She remained seated, her posture radiating a calm, centered strength that seemed to quiet the very air in the room. She didn't speak of her qualifications or her therapeutic methods. She spoke of Lily. She described the little girl she had first met, a child encased in a fortress of silence, withdrawn, and profoundly afraid of a world that had taken everything from her. And then, her voice softening, she described the girl she was becoming. Curious, brave, a child who was starting to laugh again, a child who was learning to trust that the world would not always break beneath her feet. She had brought Isabella's other sketchbooks with her. She opened one, its leather cover worn and soft. Isabella didn't fear motherhood, Ava said, her voice gentle but firm as she looked directly at Catherine. A look not of accusation, but of shared, tragic understanding. She feared that your expectations of what a mother should be would suffocate her, just as those same fears were beginning to suffocate her daughter. Lily doesn't need to be protected in a gilded cage, Mrs. Davenport. She needs the freedom to stumble, and the profound safety of knowing that someone will always, always be there to help her stand up again. She closed the sketchbook softly. That is what I have given her. It is what her mother wanted for her, and it is what her father is now, every single day, learning with courage and humility to give him too. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. Catherine stared at the copied sketch, then at Ava, then at her brother-in-law. The icy armor of her righteousness, so carefully and painfully constructed over 18 months of grief and anger, began to crack. Beneath it was not a monster, but a grieving sister, terrified of losing the last living piece of her beloved Isabella. Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in her eyes. She never told me, Catherine whispered, her voice breaking, the sound of a heart shattering in the quiet, sterile room. She never told me she felt that way. The fight was over. Later that evening, after Catherine had tearfully and formally withdrawn her guardianship petition, Marcus found Ava standing on the penthouse balcony. The city lights glittered below them like a vast, fallen constellation. Isabella's sketchbooks, he said, coming to stand beside her, his voice filled with a quiet, reverent awe. You were her voice today. I just showed them her heart, Ava replied, her gaze fixed on the distant, dark horizon. You gave it life, he insisted. He reached out, his hand gently, tentatively, covering hers where it rested on the cool metal of the railing. She entrusted her to you, and now I am too. He pulled a folded legal document from the inner pocket of his jacket. It was an updated page from his last will and testament. He had spent the entire afternoon with his lawyers. He had amended the guardianship clause. It now read, In the event of my death or incapacitation, full and sole guardianship of my daughter, Lily Thorne, is to be granted to Ava Williams, who has proven herself to be a protector of her well-being and a steward of her mother's most sacred legacy. Marcus, she started, her voice thick with an overwhelming wave of emotion. This isn't a contract, Ava, he said, his eyes searching hers in the soft, ambient glow of the city. It's a promise. You are her family. You are our family. She didn't pull her hand away, and in the quiet of the night, high above the sleeping city, two fractured souls and one little girl were no longer just surviving a tragedy. They were beginning, together, to build a home. A new kind of quiet, one that was peaceful, organic, and alive, settled into the Thorne estate in the weeks following the seismic mediation. It wasn't the sterile, empty silence of profound, unarticulated grief, but the gentle, humming stillness of a life being painstakingly, lovingly rebuilt. The sound of Lily's hesitant, happy laughter, once a shocking rarity, now filled the rooms. She would follow Ava from the sunroom to the kitchen, a small, determined shadow, narrating her world in a charming, chaotic patchwork of single words and newly formed two-word phrases. Ava, play. Lily, draw. Daddy, home. Each utterance was a small, precious miracle, a testament to the deep, foundational healing that was taking root in the home's wounded heart. The victory against Catherine had not been a triumph of conquest, but a painful, necessary, and ultimately graceful realignment of their shattered family. She had begun visiting twice a week, no longer as a formidable matriarch inspecting her territory, but as a grandmother, tentative, humble, and learning. She would sit on the floor, her impeccably tailored suit a stark, beautiful contrast to the colorful chaos of Lily's toy blocks, and she would listen, really, truly listen, as Ava guided the girl through her exercises. One afternoon, as Lily successfully built a teetering tower of 5 blocks for the very first time, Catherine turned to Ava, her eyes holding a sad, clear, and profound wisdom. I spent so many years telling Isabella what a mother should be, she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet, aching regret. I never stopped to ask her what kind of mother she wanted to be. Thank you for showing me the difference. The words were a quiet peace treaty, an acceptance not just of Ava's role, but of her own sister's long-silenced truth. Ava's role in the house had solidified, transforming from specialist to the undeniable emotional architect of their new life. Marcus, forever changed by the confrontation with his own grief and his wife's hidden truths, was more present than he had been in his daughter's entire life. He rescheduled international meetings, left the office at a reasonable hour, and made their evening therapy sessions a non-negotiable sacred part of his day. One evening, as they sat together on the living room carpet, a comfortable silence between them, watching Lily finally take 3 wobbly, independent steps from the sofa to the ottoman, Marcus reached for Ava's hand without a word. It was a simple, spontaneous gesture, filled with a universe of unspoken gratitude and a burgeoning, tender affection that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was looking at her not as an employee, not as a savior, but as a partner, an equal. It was in this atmosphere of fragile, growing, and deeply cherished peace that the final storm broke, arriving not with the bang of a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet, devastating slit of a white, official-looking envelope delivered by a stone-faced courier. It was from the State Music Conservatory. Marcus was there when she opened it. He saw the color drain from her face, saw her hand tremble as she read the single, devastating sheet of paper. "What is it?" he asked, his voice sharp with immediate protective concern. "It's a formal notice," she whispered, her voice barely audible, the paper shaking in her grasp as if it were alive. "My scholarship. It's been revoked." Marcus took the paper from her, his own eyes scanning the dense, weaponized legalese. The complaint was anonymous, but the allegations were vicious and surgically precise. It accused her of moral turpitude and of abandoning her artistic commitments, citing her withdrawal from the program to care for her mother as evidence of unreliability. It suggested her current role as a caregiver was a distraction from her true potential. And, most cruelly, it referenced a sealed academic disciplinary record from her first year. A minor incident involving a noise complaint in her dorm room that had been twisted into something sinister. "This is Catherine," Marcus said instantly, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "She lost in court, so now she's trying to come at you from another, dirtier angle." But Ava slowly shook her head, a sickening, cold certainty dawning in her eyes, a truth she could feel in her bones. "No, this isn't her. The details about my disciplinary record, the specific date, the name of the RA. No one knows those things. The records are sealed. No one in the world except—" She trailed off, her mind racing back to the very beginning, to the faceless bureaucracy of the conservatory's financial aid office, to the exhaustive, invasive background checks, the confidential files she had been required to submit. Someone had dug into the deepest, most protected, most painful corner of her past, and had weaponized her most profound wound against her. The fight wasn't over. It had just found a new, more cruel and personal battlefield. They weren't just trying to take Lily away from her anymore. They were trying to take away the very core of who she was, the artist, the musician. They were trying to tell the world that her sacrifice for her mother was, in fact, a disqualifying failure. The final scene unfolded not in a sterile courtroom or a high-stakes boardroom, but in the quiet, sunlit living room of the estate, a space that had transformed over the last few months from a gallery of grief into a sanctuary of hard-won healing. It had been 3 long, agonizing days since the notice from the conservatory had arrived. 3 days of frantic, late-night calls to lawyers, of strategic consultations, and of a gnawing dread that had settled deep in Ava's bones. Marcus had mobilized his entire legal team, a veritable army of the city's best and brightest. But the anonymous complaint was insidious. A venomous ghost they couldn't seem to fight in the open. This morning, he had called an emergency meeting, not with his lawyers, but with the only people who mattered. Ava sat on the plush sofa, a mug of untouched chamomile tea growing cold in her hands. Marcus paced before the fireplace, his movements tight with a restrained, simmering fury. And on the armchair opposite Ava, looking smaller and more fragile than ever, but with a new, clear light in her eyes, sat Catherine Davenport. "I did not file that complaint," Catherine said as soon as she arrived, her voice clear and devoid of any artifice, her gaze directed squarely and respectfully at Ava. "I know what you must think of me, but my war with you is over. I would never, ever use your past against you. That is a line I would not cross." Ava looked at her and, to her own surprise, she believed her completely. The calculated cruelty of the attack didn't have Catherine's polished, legalistic signature. This was something else. This was gutter fighting. It was then that Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, her face a mask of grave concern, entered the room, her usual impeccable composure slightly frayed. "Sir," she said, her voice low and steady, "there is someone here to see you. He says it's a matter of extreme urgency regarding the conservatory complaint." A man stepped into the room behind Mrs. Gable. He was of average height, dressed in a nondescript suit that looked a size too big for his frame, his face a mask of nervous, profuse sweat. It was Mr. Henderson, the perpetually anxious financial aid officer from the conservatory. "I had to come," Henderson stammered, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding everyone's gaze. I made a call I shouldn't have. There was pressure." "Pressure from whom?" Marcus demanded, stepping forward, his voice a low growl that made Henderson flinch. Henderson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "A board member at the conservatory. He's also on the board of a major corporate rival of yours, Mr. Thorne. A man named Peterson. He heard about Miss Williams, about her success with your daughter. He saw an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" Ava asked, her own voice dangerously quiet, cutting through Henderson's nervous rambling. "To create a scandal," Henderson admitted, the words spilling out in a desperate, pathetic rush. "To paint you as unstable, your hiring practices as reckless and unorthodox. Peterson wanted to trigger a stock drop, to create an opening for a hostile takeover of your Asian division. He paid me handsomely to dig up your entire confidential file, to find anything that could be twisted. He's the one who filed the anonymous complaint with the conservatory's board." The ugly, simple, devastating truth landed in the room with a thud. This was never about Lily's welfare. It was never even about Ava. It was about money. It was about a ruthless corporate predator using a woman's deepest grief and a child's profound vulnerability as collateral damage in a cold, brutal game of power. Ava closed her eyes for a brief moment. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it, the absolute soullessness, was breathtaking. But when she opened them again, there was no fear left. There was only a calm, cold, clarifying fire. "Do you have proof of this?" Ava asked, her voice steady as she looked directly at Henderson. "Does Peterson have any evidence of your conversation?" Henderson nodded miserably, his hand fumbling in his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, sleek audio recorder. "I record all my sensitive calls," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. "It's a habit. For protection. It's all on here." Marcus took the recorder, his expression hardening into something Ava had never seen before. It was not the face of a grieving father or a humbled CEO. It was the face of a man who was about to burn down an entire empire to protect his own. The rest happened with astonishing, ruthless speed. Marcus's lawyers, armed with the undeniable evidence on the recording, filed for an immediate injunction against the conservatory's review and a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit against Peterson and his firm. The conservatory, presented with clear, irrefutable evidence of a malicious, fabricated complaint, threw out the case against Ava within hours, issuing a formal apology and offering to reinstate her scholarship immediately. By evening, the story had broken across every major financial news network, and Peterson's career, along with his company's stock, was in a spectacular, irreversible freefall. That night, the three of them, Marcus, Ava, and Catherine, sat together in the living room. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm, dancing glow on their faces. Lily was asleep upstairs, safe, her dreams untroubled. "It's over," Marcus said, his voice filled with a profound, weary relief. "For now," Ava replied softly, a small, wise smile touching her lips. Catherine reached across the space between them and placed a delicate, cool hand on Ava's. "You are an extraordinary woman, Ava Williams," she said, her voice filled with a respect that had been hard-won and was now absolute. Isabella saw it from the very beginning. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city. "This house," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. It was just a structure, a beautiful empty shell. You filled it. You brought the music back in. He turned to face her, his eyes shining with a love that was raw, real, and undeniable. I know this isn't how these things are supposed to go. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I can't imagine this life, my life, Lily's life, without you in it. Ava stood, her heart so full it felt like it might break. She walked toward him, and this time, when he reached for her, she didn't hesitate. He pulled her into an embrace that was not about gratitude or relief, but about a profound, quiet, and deeply earned love. You didn't just teach her to stand, Marcus whispered into her hair. You taught me how to live again. A year later, on a warm spring afternoon, a small, intimate group gathered in the estate's newly renovated garden. Greenery bloomed everywhere, a vibrant, fragrant testament to life's stubborn, beautiful persistence. Lily, now walking and running with a confident, joyful stride, chased a monarch butterfly across the soft green grass. Marcus, holding a small open velvet box, knelt before Ava. Catherine stood by, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her smile genuine and bright. Ava Williams, Marcus said, his voice clear and full of a joy that was once unimaginable. You came into my life to care for my daughter. Instead, you saved us both. Will you be my wife? Will you officially be our family? And Ava, her face wet with happy tears, looked from the man she loved to the little girl who had become her heart, and gave the only answer possible. Yes. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with laughter. And the family, built not on blood, but on the unshakable foundation of courage, trust, and a love that had been tested by fire, was finally, beautifully, and completely whole.